Purchasing a serger can be a fantastic investment into your sewing. It can be both exciting and intimidating at the same time. Many of you have told me that you've bought a serger but you haven't yet unboxed it. Well, today this video is going to give you the confidence to take it out of its box, start using it and create some gorgeous garments. Are you with me? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Claire and this is the next video in my series. Thanks, I made that. So last week I put a post up on my community tab asking you for questions about sergers and you did come forward with lots of questions. By the end, you are going to feel a lot more confident in your sewing on a serger. So the first one is, my machine is noisy and vibrates. Is there anything I can do to reduce that? These questions are paraphrased because I did get a lot of the same questions, so I've just grouped them together. If your machine is noisy and vibrating, I can relate to you. I have this problem. In fact, I will not sew after about 11 p.m. at night because the walls are basically just drywall, and so I don't want to upset the neighbours. So I don't sew late at night. Recently, someone said in my last serger video in the comments that changing the needles can reduce the noise. Now, if you watch my last video, you'll know that I have pretty much never changed the needles in this thing. Maybe I've changed them once, and that's about it. That machine must be nearly 5 years old now. You could sew a mat to put underneath, so if you had any fabric that was really absorbent, like terry toweling springs to mind, Sherpa, that sort of thing. If you created a little mat for your serger to sit on, that would probably reduce the amount it vibrates. So another question I get quite frequently is, I want to get a serger, but space is so limited. I hear you, I hear you. I live in a 2-roomed apartment. My flat that I live in now is the smallest apartment that I've ever lived in, and it is very, very frustrating. You might remember the cubbies that I used to have just in here that I had all my fabric in. Well, that does house my fabric, but I've got a lot less fabric now, so I have some spare cubbies. So my serger just lives in that cubby. I get it out when I need to, i.e. if I'm sewing or I need it in a video, then I'll bring it out, put it on the table, use it, and then at the end of the session, put it away. It takes a minute or two to pack it up and put it away. As long as it's got its own home that it lives in when it's not being used, that is dedicated space, you can just pull it away and bring it back out again. That's what I do. Alternatively, you could find a space in your home where it can live, where you can use it. That's if you've got that space for that, but not everyone has. I still think a serger is worth purchasing even if space is really limited. I wouldn't be without my serger. So I got quite a few questions asking, can I do a demonstration on how to thread the serger? Now, to be honest, I don't think there is much point in that. There's lots of sergers on the market and we might not all have the same one. So I can show you how to thread this, but it's going to be different to your model probably, unless you've got that exact same model as me. Although there are similarities, there are differences, and particularly in the tension and getting a really good stitch. But I would advise you to read your manual back to front, make sure you really understand it. If you're still having problems, search for your specific model on YouTube and you may find that someone has done a tutorial for it. What is the difference between a serger and a cover stitch machine? Just very quickly, the two machines do something very different. So a serger will basically sew and finish the edges. Cover stitch is different because it will top stitch. So a cover stitch will have the option for one stitch or one line of stitching, 2 lines of stitching, or 3 lines of stitching. Now I use mine for 2 lines of stitching mainly, and that is just to top stitch, and that is all it does. It's a very expensive machine for what it does, and you can actually get the same result with a double needle on your sewing machine. The similarities that both machines have is that they were both designed to work with knit fabrics, although I use wovens on both of my machines as well. Another question is, I don't have money for a serger. What can I do? I totally feel you. I've been wanting to upgrade my serger for quite some time, but I'm not in a position to do that, and not likely to be in a position to do that for quite some time. Options: if money is tight, then you could look at second-hand options. People sell sergers all the time. Look on places like Facebook Marketplace, etc. If you don't even have money for a second-hand machine, perhaps consider getting a faux attachment for your sewing machine. So Amazon do these attachments where I've never used it myself. I've only seen it online. I think you attach it to your foot, then it will do an overcast stitch on the edge of the fabric and trim it off as well. So it does basically the same as a serger, but from what I hear, it's a lot slower than a serger. So the next question is, how often should I change my blade? I'm probably not the best person to ask about this, because as you can imagine, if you know me at all, I have never ever changed the blade on this. There was a little period of time about a year ago where I was considering changing the blade because I felt that it was a little bit blunt, but I never did, and it still works absolutely fine a year later. So I would say change your blade when you need to. So if your blade is really blunt and it's not cutting, that can happen if you keep sewing into pins and things like that. Or maybe you've just used your serger a lot and it does need changing, then change it. I believe that it'd be quite easy to change. There will be instructions on YouTube, and you can probably buy the blade quite cheap off eBay. I've just bought a new serger, but I'm scared to use it. Can you help? My advice is, if you've gone to the effort to purchase a serger and they're not cheap, even the low-end ones are not cheap, then I would say open your box up, dive in and start playing around with it. So when you open your new serger up, you will have some threads already attached, so you will not need to thread it off the bat. So that will give you an opportunity to just have a play, sew some fabric with it, see what the stitches are like, make sure the tension's correct. And the tension should be correct when you first purchase your machine. They will preset it in the factory. You probably don't have to do a lot when you first open your serger. It's only when you need to change your threads that you should be thinking about doing or learning how to do that. And there's lots and lots of tutorials. There's different ways of doing it. I always rethread from scratch. It is a good thing to learn. It was frustrating in the beginning. There's no getting around that. It was. But now I can pretty much do it with my eyes closed. Before long, you'll be threading without even thinking about it. Honestly, I cannot tell you how much easier a serger is than a sewing machine. How do I know what my seam allowance is? On the serger, printed on the plastic cover, should be your notch guide, and it's the same as the plate on the sewing machine. It will tell you where to place your fabric. Now this can be quite hard to see as you're serging through, and to be honest, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. Another way of ensuring that you get the correct seam allowance is to draw your seam allowance onto your fabric. So you want to use a heat or water erasable pen in order to do that. I use a friction pen, and you can just draw a line on your seam allowance, then use that as your guide. So when I was new to sewing, I would often see advice telling you to draw your seam allowance on your fabric, mainly for the sewing machine, but this applies to the serger as well. I used to feel like that was a really amateur thing to do, and that a real seamstress or someone with experience would never put their seam allowances on the fabric. Well, that is wrong. Past Claire, that is wrong. Experienced seamstresses do that. I do that. Not everyone does, but quite a lot do. And I still do that now after 7 or 8 years. If you need to, just draw your seam allowance in. No one will ever know, and it will help you to be more accurate. So the next question is, can you sew on a serger, or do you need to use your sewing machine to sew and then finish your seams on the serger? But it really depends on your serger. Some people, if they only use 3 threads, I would not sew on that serger. If you use 4 threads, then you should be able to just sew and finish your seams at the same time on the serger, and that is what I do in most cases. Very occasionally I will sew on the sewing machine and then go over to the serger, but it is very rare that I do that. Pretty much 98% of the time I will just sew directly on the serger, and I have never had a problem. So you should feel free to do that as long as you've got 4 threads on your serger. Does a serger require special needles? When I purchased my serger, it did say in the instruction book that you need specific needles, and in fact on my machine it says only use, and then it's got a code for specific needles. I've never ever used those needles. I just buy the normal basic sewing machine needles and put them in, and I have never had a problem. Nothing's happened to my machine, so don't waste your money on speciality needles that probably cost the earth. I really recommend that you just buy any old needles. I'd put ballpoint needles in if I was you. I think I've got ballpoint needles in there. You know me, I don't even change my needles, let alone use speciality ones. So which projects do you use your serger for the most? So the most frequent garments that I would make on there would be knits. It is knits for sure. I will use the serger for wovens, but I am more likely to use the sewing machine for wovens than for knits. So the next question is a serger faster than a sewing machine? Oh, by golly, yes, it is. It is. Even on the fast setting on your sewing machine, it's nowhere near as fast as your serger. If I can find it, I will put the official speeds of my sewing machine and my serger on screen so you can see. How much maintenance does a serger need? Well, mine's never had any maintenance, so that might give you your answer. It is good to have it maintained once a year is like the recommended, I believe. But I've never had mine maintained, and that's just because there isn't someone locally for me to go to maintain it. You can also maintain it yourself if you don't want to be paying for an official specialist to maintain it. There's lots of resources online that will help you do that, and I think that's what I would do. If I had a problem with it, I would just maintain it myself. It's more important, I think, to be cleaning it regularly. So the next question is, what's your favourite serger functions? I'm not sure I've got a favourite function, to be honest. I'm quite happy as long as it sews a good seam and trims the edge off. I'm not very adventurous with my serger, I have to say. Can you make a whole garment using only your serger? Yes and no. So in most cases I would say yes. Certainly with knits, I don't see why you couldn't sew the whole thing on the serger. The only thing is, if you wanted to top stitch, then you would need your sewing machine or a cover stitch machine. You can, but I would not recommend that you own a serger but not a sewing machine. A sewing machine should always come first, and a serger is not absolutely necessary, but it's a nice extra to have. Do I need 4 of each colour thread? The short answer to that is no. I do buy lots of colours. Over the years since I've had my serger, I have purchased colours, and I always buy 4 colours. So what I do is, if I'm doing a project, maybe it's in a plum purple colour, I will then go and purchase 4 threads in a plum purple so that I've got a coordinating thread. And then over the years, because I've done that a number of times, I've built up quite a collection of colours. Now you get quite a lot of thread on the cones, so you're not ever going to run out of a colour if you purchase it. I know that when I invest in those 4 colours, they're going to do me properly for the rest of my sewing experience. But is it essential to do that? If you are saving money, then no, you don't want to do that. And I'm actually in a position now where I don't need to buy colours anymore because I've got most of the colours and I can work with the ones that I have. But if you don't want to buy colours, then don't buy colours. I would say you need a white, you need 4 whites, you need 4 blacks, and you need 4 greys. Or maybe you only need 4 greys and no whites and no blacks. It really depends how much you want your seam colour to coordinate with your fabric. So the next question is, when is it worth purchasing a serger? Today. Today, go and buy one today if you can. If you can't, I'm not going to encourage you to spend money you haven't got. But if you've got the money, today is the day. People always say if you sew knits, then that's when you would like a serger. But actually I sew knits and wovens. It's not essential to sewing. It's really not at all. So if you've just got a sewing machine and that's all you can afford, just stick with that. Don't feel pressurised by this video or other videos or anyone online suggesting you need a serger, because you don't. It's just a very, very nice extra to have. So when it becomes a benefit to your sewing is if you're sewing a lot of knits, or if you just want to finish your seams more neatly, if you're looking to upgrade the results that you get through sewing, then I would consider a serger for that need. Does the quality of the thread you use matter for a serger? I'm torn on this one because I'm not going to be going buying 4 Gutterman thread for every colour that I need, and I'm just not going to do that. It would break the bank. My threads are Moon threads, which are a lot cheaper than Gutterman. You do want to consider quality, but it doesn't have to be top of the range, is my personal opinion. And the last question I have for you is one that I'm sure many of you have got in your mind, is can I recommend a good serger? No, is the answer. This one is good enough. It's entry level. It does the job. It served me well for the last however many years I've had it. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I don't not recommend it either. It's just one of those machines that it does what it says on the tin. I quite like the look of the Brother 1034D, I think that's what it's called. I've never had that one. That's entry level as well, and that's had a lot of good reviews. If I can recommend anything, I would recommend that one, mainly because it does have a lot of personal recommendations to it. But personally, I haven't used it. So if you've got more money to spend, you might look into an air threaded serger, which is my ultimate goal. Maybe I will die a happy woman if I ever am in a position to purchase one of those, which I doubt I will be. So that's all I have for you. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments below. If I get enough questions, I may do another video like this. Don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the things, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye for now.